This question comes up quite a lot. What happens when you plug a third digital pad into a Roland TD-50 or TD-27 module? I've got an additional digital snare and digital ride here, so let's find out. I promise you that I haven't gone insane and bought 2 additional digital pads. I've borrowed these from a friend at the studio that I work from in order to show you how this all works. And I have known the answer to this question for a while because a few other people have tested it out, but I was in a unique position to try for myself, so I wasn't going to miss out. I'll show you what happens when you plug that third pad in, whether there's any differences in playability or functionality of the third pad, and work out whether it's a worthwhile thing to do. And if you like experiments like this with electronic drums, I've got a few other ones on this channel and plan to do plenty more in the future, so don't forget to subscribe. On both the TD-50 and the TD-27, when you plug in the third pad, it instantly recognises that you've added the pad and asks you if you want to go to the trigger screen. This actually happens anytime that you plug in a new digital pad, if I remember correctly. If you choose to go to the trigger screen, you can then select any pad that you want it to be assigned to, other than the snare and ride, which are already assigned. This will disable whichever corresponding analog input you choose, just like the snare and ride do with their respective inputs. The module will then remember this assignment so that you don't have to set it up every time you plug the pad in, and you can swap to another pad whenever you want from the digital trigger screen. So here I'm going to assign a second digital snare to AUX 1. This then disables that input and lets me play whatever instrument is assigned to that input. Or here I've got a second digital ride assigned to crash 2. You get the same sensitivity and overall trigger parameters as you would do with any other digital pad plugged in. You still get positional sensing from the pads for any of the instruments that support it. Though what I did notice about the positional sensing for the second ride in particular was that it only works for certain inputs. If you use the second ride as a crash input, the positional sensing is disabled even if you choose a ride instrument. Whereas if you set the second ride to one of the auxiliary inputs, it lets you use the positional sensing. I'm guessing that this is because normally positional sensing isn't available on the analog crash inputs, therefore it isn't allowed even when you replace it with the digital pad. And finally, the touch choking on the digital ride still works too. For any of you that are hoping this will give you a second 3-zone cymbal pad, unfortunately that's not the case. You only get as many zones out of these pads as you would have got using the analog input, which means 2 zones on a cymbal, the bow and the edge, or 2 zones on the snare, the head and the rim. Though, as I said, you do still get positional sensing and you still get rimshot support if the instrument supports it. And unfortunately you don't get the cross-stick feature out of the second digital snare either. On the one hand, this is a bit of a shame, but on the other hand, it's kind of understandable with how many zones are usually available to you. You can't just magic up an additional zone on a module that only supports so many zones. Now, it's up to you whether you think that this support should have been built in or not, but I wasn't exactly surprised. Of course, you can choose any instrument on any zone and layer them like you would be able to with any other pad. So if you do want a 2-zone ride cymbal on a second digital ride, you can do that. And I suppose if you really wanted to, you could make a 2-zone 18-inch digital hi-hat out of one of these pads. But, you know, why would you do that? It is fun to play around with an additional digital pad, because they're a joy to play on even without the benefits of the extra zones, but there aren't really any strong reasons to splash out on a third digital pad when you can get the same overall results out of a good analog pad. If you were to use a solid analog trigger that supports positional sensing, you could get the same number of articulations out of that analog pad as an auxiliary snare. The digital snare does give you positional sensing without hotspots, which is great, but it's a pretty big price to pay for that when you don't get the full functionality out of that second pad. And the same goes for a second digital ride. You can get pretty much the same functionality out of a good analog cymbal trigger, minus the touch muting. So all in all, it's fun, but it's not really worth doing unless you've got plenty of money to burn and you really want to do it. So what do you think? Is this something that you'd consider doing, or do you see it as a frivolous novelty? Do you think that Roland should implement more support here, or do you reckon they're going to save it for the next flagship? Let me know down in the comments. And of course, if you enjoyed this video, you know what to do. Like, subscribe, and check out the edrumworkshop.com if you want new kits or samples for your electronic drum module. Above all, enjoy the rest of your day, and I'll see you in the next video. Cheers!